When I was doing research for this class, I came across an article that was by John Timmerman, and I thought it was really interesting because it brought up a concept of Poe that I had not recognized before. And it said that Poe's idea of a beautiful woman was a dead woman. And so you can literally look back through his body of work and it's littered with female corpses. And as much as I have read Poe, I had never noticed it, and I had not made that correlation. So I thought that was really interesting, and that's where my interest started. Because after that, I started looking at Madeline Usher as an important character, and then ultimately she was the most important character. She held all the power in this story. So I had recently done some research on the cult of true womanhood, and this was going on when this was written. It was around the same time that Poe was writing, so he would have experienced this, and it was basically just the way that society viewed women, and the roles that women should play in society. And so Poe would have been experiencing this at the same time, and so it really, one of the main things was that women were supposed to be submissive to the men, you know, whoever, husband, brother, whoever was, there, they were supposed to be submissive to this man. And not only that, but they were only allowed, and they weren't allowed any power at all, really. And the men decided that they could, decorate their houses and raise their kids, and then that's their purpose. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that was the only option that they were given. And, they had to fit into that mold. And so I thought it was ironic because at the time that this was being, delved into by society, Poe was writing this, and Madeline in this story had, in my view, had all of the power. She was controlling everything that was happening. So it was, although he did put her as the woman of the house, he exaggerated it. I mean, it was out of control. And so I think that it started very early on for me reading that I realized that Madeline was going to be an important character. When the narrator starts describing the house, and he says there's this huge fissure in the house and it shouldn't be standing, and it's basically a miracle that it's even standing. And then he gets inside and he hears about Madeline, and she has all these things wrong with her and nobody knows what it is, and essentially she shouldn't be alive, but she is. And it's almost like at that point I knew that she was going to be the character that the other characters depended on. And so she becomes the mortar to the bricks, and you realize that without her, the other characters would never have evolved, and the story would never have evolved. She is the suspense. But before I get into that, I want to talk about how she's the link for the other characters, because obviously the house is not collapsing because of her. I think that she took that role as the head of the house, and that so the house is actually depending on her. So the house can become its own character, and that character is dependent on Madeline's character. And ultimately, in the end, the narrator tells us all these things that are wrong with the house and describes the conditions and the things that it was in. But ultimately, in the end, it only falls when Madeline falls. And the same can be said with Roderick. Although he's trying to get rid of Madeline, he also understands that if he gets rid of Madeline, he'll be getting rid of himself, because he knows that he is dependent on her. And after he buries her alive, his madness just grows and grows and grows until finally, she releases him essentially by dying. So he's dependent on her. The house is dependent on her. And it's almost as if everyone is dependent on her, because everyone is either waiting for her to do something or waiting to see what happens next. And so she's that important that all the other characters are waiting on her. I think it's also interesting that she is in control and has some control, because according to society at that time, she should have been listening to Roderick. He should have been in control of her, and it just does not work out that way. In the end, it's her that flings open the doors, and that it's almost as if she's controlling the weather because the things are all happening, and it just, she's in control of everything by the end, and you can see that whether it be supernatural or just, exaggerated. But the other thing that I thought was interesting was that when you learn early on and you see Madeline and her cataleptic persona, you don't actually see her. I mean, he gets a glimpse of her, the narrator, but you don't actually see her. But then the more that you hear Roderick talk about her, you realize that she's this important character. And then they're burying her alive. And then after that, things start to get really suspenseful because they're just waiting on what's going to happen. And essentially, it's because of Madeline. She is the suspense. And she's in her presence is there even when she's not. Even because you don't know a whole lot about her, but without her, there would be nowhere to evolve the story. So she's always present even when she's not there. So I guess all in all, I thought it was interesting because Madeline represented the things that women were not supposed to represent, but it was done in such a indirect way that if you weren't looking for a feminist take on it, you definitely could read it without taking that away from it. I do read things with a feminist take a lot of times, so I did see that, and I thought that was a different way to look at Poe as well, because I would not have expected to find that, and I did. So I thought that was the most interesting thing for me, and that's why I chose to go the woman of power route on this paper.